Rosa DeLauro, of course, is the Congresswoman from Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District. Now, if you know anything about the 3rd, it was realigned, as many districts were a few years ago. And so it really goes from Long Island Sound, and I always thought of it as really New Haven-centric. But now it goes into the Naugatuck Valley and over into Waterbury. So, as we know, Rosa has been in Congress since 1991. She's the ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee. She sits on the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee and is the ranking member of the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education Appropriations Subcommittees, where she oversees our nation's investments in education, health, and employment. And it's such a great thing to have Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro here today to talk to us about an issue that has always been very much top of mind for her. Rosa has always been fighting for working families and for people who have not had all the advantages and people with disabilities fit into that category. Thank you so much. Wonderful to see you. Thank you, Ruby. Great to see you. Isn't this great? Isn't this new space fabulous? Really terrific. I just want to give you a few minutes to just kind of talk about some of the things that you've been concerned about disability issues lately, and then I have some questions for you. And here you are. Yeah.
Sorry, guys. It's just wonderful to be here with all of you. Honestly, this has become a staple of our, election year activities, and it's so critically important to always keep the issues of people with disabilities, developmental disabilities, front and center. It's such a big issue, becoming increasingly more a very, very big issue in the United States today. And to you, Diane, let me say thank you to award-winning, journalists going and moderating this effort. I'll take a second to acknowledge Carol Scully and ARC and the great, wonderful work that you do there. Look, we did the American with Disabilities Act. We did that over 30 years ago. And it made a difference in looking at how we help to transform people's lives for the better. But we know that there's still a lot to do in this area, and you have to keep vigilant about it. And you mentioned in my introduction, I've had the opportunity, and I'm really blessed with the opportunity to serve. I served as chair of the Appropriations Committee, now the ranking member, but in the same with the Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education Subcommittee. And there we deal with services. For special education, for the services that we provide for people who have developmental disabilities. And where I try to focus, and I try to jot some stuff down, I think we need to look at rental assistance programs. I think we need to deal with affordable housing. That's a big issue nationwide, but particularly for people with disabilities. We have to be mindful of that. And, in this nation, being disabled often results in people living in poverty in our country. That's wrong. That really, really is wrong. We have to deal with sub-minimum wage. That's an issue that's high on my agenda. There's now this, what is it called, the Switch G program here, so that there's legislation to deal with that. We put in, I think Connecticut now has, one of the first recipients of one of these grants to look at the sub-minimum wage issue. You got the issue of increased asset limits on supplemental security income, increased benefits, and I'm sure John Larson spoke about Social Security. Of course, he is the giant of the Congress on that issue. But you have to deal with evictions, with long-term services, on investment in community living. I mentioned minimum wage, job accessibility. I think we have to take a look at the times we face and look at how the nature of the issues that face the community have changed and where we have made some progress, but where we need to go in the future. And I can make, you don't make a lot of commitments in my business, but what I'm going to do, because I'm going to be It may sound very political here at the moment. I'm intending to have the gavel back on the Appropriations Committee so that we can deal with making the kinds of investments in these areas that are critical for our community. So.
Rosa, you spoke about the sub-minimum wage, and there was a time when shelter workshops were the first opportunity for people with disabilities to be able to have jobs. But we've gone beyond that now, and yet we still have these what are called 14C certificates that allow some employers to pay well below the minimum wage. And I'm wondering, there's the TIME Act, the Transformation to Competitive Integrated Employment, that's in Congress. Would you suppose that and oppose bills that would perpetuate shelter workshops and other sub-minimum wage employment?
That's what I tried to imply in my opening comments. I think that's, we have to be rid of that. I think we have to pay people what is the minimum wage and not sub-minimum wage. That's the thing we need to fight against. I am delighted that there are programs, one of which I said they're providing grants to states to be able to look at how we switch these efforts, and there's other legislation. So there really is a consciousness in the Congress about this issue and how critically important it is. This is about someone's economic security. What's the biggest issue we face today in this country? Cost of living. People today live paycheck to paycheck. They struggle. They don't know where they're going to get money to put food on the table, to take care of their health care, their housing, all of these things. And they haven't seen their wages gone up. So if you discriminate against someone because of a developmental disability and they have a sub-minimum wage, they can't make it. They are not going to make it. So we need to fight back on that issue and make sure that we are treating people fairly and equally. Now, one thing I would just say, we have to understand that the problems and the concerns of the disabilities community are. But that shouldn't be a stigma, and it shouldn't hold people back. We need to let people move at the pace that they can and provide them with the services that they need in order to be able to move forward.
Rosa, as you know, one of the issues that's been big in this state for a long time, for a lot of people, is affordable housing. Is there enough affordable housing? And I would say, most people would say, no, there isn't. So here's the other issue. Is there affordable housing that's accessible, that has universal design? What can we do with federal funds to try to ensure that there's more of that created in the state?
Well, I think, again, housing and affordable housing is an issue in the state of Connecticut, but it is an issue all over the country. And the problem of homelessness is as well. So that, again, I think as times change and you think about the issues that are coming up and that are front and center now, I think this one, Diane, is front and center. That we need to think about how we are making it affordable and how we are making it accessible. I would add one more thing. People with disabilities are more likely than other groups to be evicted. More likely to be evicted. 10%, just 10% of tenants have legal representation in their eviction cases compared to 90% of landlords. Now, that's why I've introduced something called the Eviction Prevention Act. It ensures low-income individuals, including disabled tenants, they're provided a right to counsel in these cases. So the whole area of housing, affordable, accessible, of making sure that people have a roof over their heads. And that's part of the American dream. It really is. You know, that you have some place to lay your head down at night. And, free from fear and a way in which you can create some self-confidence and independence. It's like investing in community living. It's getting people to be able to have a safe place for themselves. And I know that people like my colleague Maxine Waters and others who sit on the Financial Services Committee are looking at that, and the appropriations and the Housing and Urban Development Subcommittee looking at this in terms of how we can make it affordable, how we can make it accessible, and how that in fact deals with people with disabilities.
One of the questions that I think is really interesting is about how we're handling people who have mental health problems and what the right path is. And one of the things that we've seen are so many tragic responses by well-meaning, I'm sure, police officers who are called in by a family member when someone is having real distress, is really having a crisis. And instead of just having a police officer, could we provide funding so that we could also send, along with the officer, mental health support people who could possibly do something completely different for them?
Well, you put your finger really on the pulse of this effort. So many of the cases where there is a response from law enforcement are really at the base of it is some sort of a mental health crisis or issue. And the law enforcement people will tell you that they don't belong in dealing with these issues, which is one of the reasons why we established, and again, this is not self-serving, I fund that in the appropriations bill. It's the 988 number that then shifts whatever it is as 911 to 988, which is just simply about where you need mental health services, where you need a clinician, where you need someone who can help work out whatever the base mental health issues are about, rather than bringing it to law enforcement, which oftentimes results in an arrest, but it's not needed because people react in different ways. And I believe our biggest champions of doing something like this, Diane, is the law enforcement community. They do not see themselves as social scientists or psychologists or mental health providers, So we started down a path, I think, and it's working. One of the things I was most fearful of is that the funding of the 988 hotline, if you will, was that we weren't going to appropriate enough money so that when people call, there was nobody at the other end. But we have been providing serious resources to address that issue.
So important, as you said, the police officers don't want to have that responsibility.
They don't.
I want to ask you a question that goes into private equity funding. We've seen this in our state. Of course, it's all over the place, but we just recently have been seeing it with some small hospitals owned by the Prospect. These private equity firms come in. They buy physician practices, they buy hospitals, they buy other healthcare and portions of the healthcare system. And then, of course, to try to extract more and more profit, what do? They get rid of equipment, sell off equipment, they get rid of highly qualified people and hire people who will cost them less money, people who are maybe not as certified, maybe not as skilled, and get rid of some services that are not money-making services. How do we fix this?
I think there's an overall issue. That is private equity, but it's also the consolidation of health services. I, for one, have been opposed to this for a very, very long time, and I've spoken out about it because I've watched hospitals gobble up these small practices, and they tell you that it is an effort to help bring costs down, but it only raises the cost of health care for people. But we need to fight against the private equity effort because it's not about health care. It is about return on the dollar and greed in many respects. And that's something I think that we should look at legislation. We should be very careful about what we allow to happen because of its consequences. And we have enough examples of the detrimental consequences in doing this that I think it is a mistake. For me, it's all about the consolidation of what I call power in the United States. It's happening in this area, it's happening in the food industry, it happens with the oil industry. It's rampant, and so that you've got a small number of people who are directing the services, and you are at their mercy. Because as you said, the equipment goes, the services go, and all it is about what is the return on the dollar. We need to fight against it.
And the cases going on in the state right now, I think is really
yes, I think it's a very, very interesting one.
Really
yes, yeah.
One other question I want to ask you is a little bit tied into the mental health issue as well, and that is, we're all trying to find ways to end the abuse of painkillers. And we've seen, I know in awful examples. That one time was about a year ago, and all those people passed out on the green because they'd gotten some bad drugs. And yet, the problem is, while trying to enforce these new regulations and trying to stop people from abusing these drugs, getting away from them, helping them get some support to get off them, what about people who have constant chronic pain? Some of them are being denied pain medication because some of the system says you can only have this many pills for this pain, and yet they have pain all, every day, not just for a short period of time recovering from an injury.
Well, it's like the pendulum swings, my dear, as you know. Oftentimes, if it was a toothache or an abscess tooth or whatever it was, you got a bottle of 30 pills, and so then you had a vicious cycle of people then getting, accustomed to taking it. I'm a fanatic on this, and my husband recently had back surgery, and like the first day or so, they gave him, the medications, and then all of a sudden I said, no, we're just going to do Tylenol, not do that. But you make a good point. And look, I'm not a physician. I think there has to be a way to distinguish an individual whose circumstances are that it is chronic pain and that they cannot survive without some level of medication to make them functional. But that, I think, has to come from a medical profession, not from a pharmaceutical perspective, in terms of, selling a product or so forth. And I almost think it's on an individual basis. And oftentimes some of our folks can't get the kind of individual medical help that they need. So I don't really have the answer for you, but I think that what we try to do is to avoid, the OxyContin kind of situations, and now we've got some consequences which put people who are seriously in pain, being denied a way for which they then to be able to live a good life free of a lot of pain. They probably mostly have pain. I don't know the answer, but I think it's in many cases not for politicians to decide. I think we need the guidance of the medical profession and how they think that we ought to try to proceed in this area.
Congresswoman, how concerned are you about the attacks on the Affordable Care Act?
Oh, God, I'm frightened. I'm not going to lie to you. I am frightened. And again, I hear about the issues that I care deeply about, and I have the opportunity. I am blessed, to be in that position on appropriations and on the subcommittee where we can direct funds and resources. But you know how we struggle to get the Affordable Care Act. I'm a survivor of ovarian cancer, and no one wanted to insure me, and now people with pre-existing conditions get insured, young people up to age 26, all of the benefits that are there. Is there still ways to go? Certainly. But there is a move, and I would be less than honest with you, and it is clearly stated in this Project 2025, by the way, which I read, and it is frightening. It would be dismantling the Affordable Care Act. And there is nothing in its place. The way it's been described is
there are concepts.
A concept. Well, what in God's name is a concept? Tell me what the program is. Tell me how it's going to work. Let's try to break it. But that's not the case. It is just, it goes back to, and I will just sit here on the stage and say, God bless John McCain when he said thumbs down. And we're not going to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It is one of the single biggest pieces of legislation that's changed people's lives in this country. I put it in the category, I always say that the great strength of the Congress is in its potential. And that historically, we have really tried to make a difference and transform people's lives. Medicare, Social Security, the civil rights legislation, a GI bill, the ability of working families to be able to send their kids to school. I put the Affordable Care Act in that bucket of historic pieces of legislation that have been able to change people's lives. Do we have to do something about premiums? Yes, something that we should maintain, and it does scare me. And I'm working like you know what to make sure that that does not happen.
And it surprises me so much that we have these constant attacks. Maybe this is naive, but I think most people like it.
Yes.
Regardless of your party, I think most people have benefited and like it.
Right, and that's the reason why. Look, years ago, Social Security, several years ago, I studied what the social safety net was in this country. As I said, Medicare, Social Security, unemployment insurance, all of those things. And by the way, those were ultimately bipartisan pieces of legislation. Democrats, Republicans said this is the problem. They came together at different perspectives, but they came up with a solution. In the early days of Social Security, no one believed that it was going to really work. That we were going to be able to get the checks out. That too many people had the same names, and it was going to be chaos. Do you think, is there anybody here today that would say, let's be rid of Social Security? Hell no, excuse me. No. And that is the same thing with the Affordable Care Act. Once it was into effect, once people understood its value, and for women in particular, honestly, God, before being a woman was a pre-existing condition, you know, and so that has been turned around, and people for the first time in their lives, for themselves and their families, have gained access to health care in this country, and it's a right, not just a privilege. And so they like it, and I believe that's why people have been unable to tank it and to repeal it. And especially, my friends, when you got nothing on the other side of that. Don't tell me it's coming and so forth. No, I'm going to stay with where we are. Thank you so much. This is, you know, I said at the outset, this is one of the most worthwhile activities in an electoral campaign. It's substance, it's real, it's about people, and it's about what you're willing to do, what you have done, and what your plans are. It's not just a soundbite someplace. So thank you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what you're doing.
And we're so lucky because 250 people can watch on the live stream. CTN is going to be running this, so a lot of people are going to see it. So thank you so much for coming. And I'm letting you just